This video is about using color to communicate hierarchy in user interface design. Before we start, we'll need an understanding of HSLA. HSLA is a function that defines a color. It has four values. The first is hue, a value between 0 and 360, and defines any color on the color wheel. So pretty much anything you would think of as color except for black, white, and gray. The second value is saturation. It's a percentage that defines how much gray is in the color. At 100%, there is no gray, and at 0%, the color is all gray. This controls how vibrant or dull a color looks. The third value is lightness. It's also a percentage and defines how much black and white is in the color. At 50%, there is no black and white. Below 50%, we start adding black, and at 0, the color is completely black. Above 50%, we start adding white, and at 100, the color is completely white. The last value is opacity, a value between 0 and 1, and controls how transparent the color is. We don't need to worry about opacity for this video. Imagine we have this design of 3 squares on a white background. We want to redesign this so the third square is the most important and draws the user's attention. It could be a call to action, like a submit button on a form, and the other 2 squares might be secondary actions like cancel. To communicate the importance of this third square, we can use contrast. So we could make the square bigger than the other 2, we could change the shape of it, or we could use color. Normally, you wouldn't just use one property, you would use a combination, but for this video, I'm just going to focus on color. One approach we can use is to start by setting the squares to the same hue, saturation, and lightness, so they look the same. Next, set the saturation of the first 2 squares to 50% and the third square to 100%. So the first 2 squares look dull, while the last square looks vibrant. This draws the user's attention to the third square and communicates our hierarchy. A problem occurs if we introduce a new hue to the design. I'm not going to touch saturation or lightness. I'm just going to change the hue of the first 2 squares to blue. Now something has gone wrong. We've lost our hierarchy. The first 2 squares are now competing for the last square for importance. If we convert this to grayscale, we can see what's happened. We use the term color value to describe how dark or how light a color is. We can see when we had all orange squares, the value looks the same. But in the second example, the blue squares have a significantly darker value than the orange, which doesn't make sense. I didn't change the lightness value. I didn't add any black to the color. All I did was change the hue. This is the counterintuitive part about HSLA. When I first started using it, I assumed that lightness controlled color value, how dark or how light a color was. It turns out that hue and saturation also impact value. To make things worse, it's also not linear. Depending on the hue, the saturation will have varying degrees of influence on the value. So how do you figure this out when trying to design a UI hierarchy using color? Fortunately, an artist by the name of Marco Bucci has made this tool that maps hue and saturation to color value. If we look at our orange example, we can see that the orange at saturation 100% has a slightly darker value than orange at saturation 50%, which maintains our hierarchy. However, our blue at saturation 50% is darker than orange at 50%. In fact, its value is darker than orange at 100%, causing the blue squares to contrast more on a white background and confuse the hierarchy. So if you want to use this blue and maintain our hierarchy, you would need a saturation that has a lighter value than the orange at 100%, which is all the way over here at about 10%. And the result is this. If we compare this with what we had before, you can see that the new blue demands less attention than the old one. I want to give a big thanks to Marco for working this out. You can find links to his color map and his original video on the subject below. And if you want to know more about me, you can head over to bradwoods.io.